Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this Audit and Governance Committee meeting on Wednesday, the 27th of November, July. Sorry. I've become a pensioner and I've also got hay fever for the first time in my life, so I don't... Sorry. My name's Councillor Alan Platt and I'm chair of this committee. Councillor Mark Clifford on my left is vice chair. Members are reminded that the meeting is being recorded and will be accessible on the Council's YouTube page. If you wish to speak at any stage, please indicate to me you wish to do so. When I invite you to speak, please turn your microphone on and turn it off when you finish speaking. Please speak clearly and do not cover your mouth, unlike the Spanish footballer on Sunday. After speaking, to make it easier for any lip readers to understand you. Can everyone ensure their phones are turned to silent? We're not expecting a fire drill. If the alarm sounds, please exit by the nearest and safest fire escape and congregate on the car park at the front of the White Hart. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our new monitoring officer, Kay Lovelady, to her first committee meeting. Welcome, Kay. Do we want to go around the room to introduce ourselves? Or yes, let's do that. Can we start on the back row?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gail Wootton. I'm the Director of Property and Planning for Chorley Council.
I'm Oliver Denton, the Head of Finance.
I'm Hannah Birchall. I'm Principal Financial Accountant.
I'm Amy Skillen. I'm Auditor.
I'm Gareth Winstanley, External Audit Manager from Grant Thornton.
Good afternoon, my name is Tasneem Safdar, Head of Legal and Procurement.
I'm Angela Graham, Health and Safety Team Leader.
Jackie Murray, Senior Auditor.
Dawn Highton, Head of Audit and Risk.
Claire Gornall, Democratic Services Officer.
Kay Lovelady, Tri-Council Monitoring Officer.
Again, I'm Alan Platt, I'm chair of this committee.
Councillor Mark Clifford, vice chair of the committee.
Councillor Julie Bear, representing Coppell.
Michelle Brown, Councillor for Clayton West and Curedon.
Gordon France, Councillor for Chorley North East.
Christine Hayden, Councillor for Eccleston, Heskin and Charnock Richard.
Martin Top, Councillor for Chorley East.
I'm Chris Sinnott, I'm the Chief Executive.
Deirdre Moss, Councillor for Buckshaw and Whittle.
Pete Ripley, Independent Person for Member Complaints.
Thank you, everyone. We'll now begin the meeting. We have apologies for absence. We have apologies from Charlotte Fitch and Neil Holton. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any pecuniary interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda. Does anyone have any interest to declare? Smashing. Oh, sorry. Councillor Brown, sorry.
It's just pointed on one of the papers. We have an appendix that has councillor allowances on it. So I think there is pecuniary interest here that we need to just talk about, or possibly we don't. I just wanted to double check that. Through you, Chair. The matter's already been decided. That's information that's already been gone through a council decision-making process, so you're found within this meeting. Thank you. Can we just check what the report is asking for? But I think it asks for the committee to approve the report. It's approve the report, not the allowances themselves. I'm not sure that's clear then on the paper, because it does say for the committee to approve the report, and that's an appendix to the paper. So I think we just need to do. That's fine, but can we just clarify that for the minutes? Thank you.
Any more interests? Nope. Right. Okay. Item 3, minutes of the meeting from Wednesday, the 27th of May 2026, pages 3 to 10 in the meeting papers. any comments or points of accuracy to raise? Are we happy to approve the minutes? Can I have a show of hands, please, from the members? Thank you. Item 4 is the external audit update, pages 11 to 24. This item is for us to consider and this item is for us to consider and note the report. I'll hand over to Gareth, who will do this. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you mentioned there, the report you've got before you this afternoon is our audit update report. The first few pages really talk about progress on the audit currently, and the latter pages primarily there for information, but various reports and pieces of information that have come out since the last committee in the local government sector. If I could perhaps draw your attention then to pages 14 and 15 of the pack. We just highlight here the progress on the audit. I'm pleased to note that we received the draft financial statements in line with the submission deadline of the 30th of June, and we're currently commencing our final accounts audit as we speak. We've got a team that are working on this and working with the council's finance staff, and we look forward to bringing our audit findings report to the November meeting. So it's very much in its infancy, the audit at this stage. The other area that we focus our work on is around your value for money arrangements. I'm pleased to report that work has also commenced, and we'll be bringing our auditor's annual report, concluding and summarising the value for money arrangements that are in place here at Chorley to the November meeting as well. As I say, the page 15 just highlights our audit deliverables for the year. Happy to say that everything is on track, given where we are at the moment. I wasn't necessarily intending to go through anything else, Chair. As I say, happy to take any questions on the latter pages, but happy to open it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Members of the committee, any questions for Gareth? Councillor Hayden?
It's not so much, it's a comment, Gareth, and thanks very much. The report was very easy to understand. And once again, you've given us some pointers as the audit committee as to where we should be focusing some of our questions. And what we usually do is we ask Neil, and I suppose, is Oliver, are you representing Neil today, Oliver? Where those are applicable to Chorley Council, is that you incorporate those questions into a further session with us, just to make sure that we cover those off, so our knowledge is up to date. So if that's okay with you, Chair.
Okay, any more questions, Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Gareth. I just wanted to, it's great that it's going well. I just wondered if there's any risks that you were aware of, or anything that the finance team are aware of that would, impede on the progress of the audit. Thank you.
Well, as I say, it is very early days. One of the, I wouldn't say risks, but one of the new areas of focus this year is around the indexation that is being applied to assets that haven't been revalued in the current year. So that is a national procedure that we're having to do at all our audits. So that will require a degree of scrutiny and challenge back to the valuer. But at this stage, we've not commenced that work, but there'll be commentary in our audit findings report around that later in the year.
Any more questions from members of the committee? Craig, are you happy? Is there anything you'd like to raise, or are you okay?
No, everything's fine.
Thanks. Right, that's for noting, I presume. Yep, no further questions. We'll move on to the next item. Item 5, which are the proposed changes to the Council's constitution. This item is for us to consider and provide feedback on the proposed changes. I'll hand over to Gail to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully the report is relatively straightforward, but I will take you through it. Reviewing the Council's constitution is something that we should do regularly, and it is the process itself is built into the constitution. So paragraph 8 of the report talks about a constitution working group, which is currently chaired by myself, which is why I'm here today. But as you can see there, constitutes members, the interim monitoring officer, the new monitoring officer, head of legal and procurement, and members of the democratic services team. And what we've done over the past few months is essentially a page turn of the constitution and identified a number of minor errors and other corrections that are required. So the review process itself is set out in the constitution, and I've set it out in the report at paragraph 10. Where it is considered that it is a relatively minor change, there is an existing delegation to the monitoring officer to make that change themselves. And you'll be able to see at the bottom of agenda page 26 that there are 4 categories that those changes would fall into. So that's A, a minor variation, B, a change that's required to remove any inconsistency or ambiguity, C, something that's required to put into effect a decision that the council has taken elsewhere, and D, to comply with the law. So what you can find under table 2, which is to note for the committee, is a list of those changes that we have identified that we think fall into one of those 4 categories. And the final column on table 2 explains which of those categories are there. So I'll come back to the member allowance scheme. There are other changes, 4 of those, which I've documented on table 1, which fall outside of that delegation. We feel fall outside of that delegation, and I will go through each of those in turn. But in terms of the process, what you're asked to do this afternoon is to provide comment on those 4 changes, proposed changes within table 1, which would then be passed to council, and it would be after council makes that decision in September that those changes would or would not be implemented. For those changes proposed into table 2, which again fall under the officer delegation, it is proposed that those changes would be made sooner than that through an officer decision that Kay Lovelady can make, and then they would come into effect straight away. They would also, however, be reported to the next available council meeting, September, and if council disagree with those changes, there could be an opportunity to revoke those changes. So in terms of the member allowance scheme, one, it's been highlighted to me just an hour or so ago that the proposed change is inaccurate. So I apologise for that. That is something that, because that has been made outside of the Constitution Working Group, that information gets fed in and we will just update that. That falls into that category C, which has already been decided elsewhere, and the Constitution just needs to be reflected and updated that. So the figures are incorrect. There is an omission in terms of the vice chairs aren't there, but for the purposes of what you're looking at today, that is just to note those proposed changes, because like I said, those fall within the delegation to officer. The focus of the report is really on those 4 changes in table 1. And Chair, if you'll permit, I'm just going to pause there and just see if there's any questions in terms of the process before we get into what those proposed changes in table 1 are.
Thanks, Gail. Okay, any questions in terms of the process? Councillor Hayden.
Did you have any new legislation or any new processes that you were meant to impact against the current notes, or are these just a look through of what is existing at the moment to make sure that it's up to date?
One of the changes is in relation to the Data Protection Act, so we have kind of updated in terms of where a piece of legislation has been revoked or rescinded, and there is a newer piece of legislation just to make sure that that is up to date. It's a constantly changing piece in terms of trying to make sure that you're up to date with legislation. And in a sense, if something is law, then that trumps the Constitution in any event. I might return to that point, Councillor Hayden, when we come back to talking about the future changes around planning committees, because that is important. But essentially anything that is required to comply with the law would fall into that officer delegation to the monitoring officer.
Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. I can see this is just some changes. You know, we're talking about these 4 items, but I'm going to presume constitution working groups, there's usually more member involvement. Is the, I know we're here discussing it to obviously to vote on this, but I'm going to presume if it was a wider constitution review, there would be a member working group as well.
So to be clear, this constitution working group doesn't include any member involvement. The process as set out in paragraph 10 says that this is the start of that member engagement. But this has been, I mean, the constitution was only updated last May, and that was a fairly kind of more root and branch review in terms of the constitution. This has been a, I was going to say a light touch. I'm not sure whether other members of the constitution working group would agree with that. It's been a thorough review, a thorough page turn, but has really picked up, as you can see, the focus of the changes are some of those that fall within that officer delegation, and arguably some of the ones on table 1 may really fall in with that officer delegation anyway, but we did think it was prudent to bring it to members. I think you're right, if it was a more root and branch constitution review, then that could involve members at an earlier stage than now, for example.
Thanks, Gail. Any more questions, or shall we let Gail continue?
Thank you, Chair. So the first change is documented in the report between paragraphs 14 and 16, and is perhaps one of those that sort of could have gone either way, really. It's about corporate parenting, and as the report tries to explain, the way the current constitution says that it is one of the councillors' main roles of this council is to demonstrate their awareness of the corporate parenting role. And as paragraphs 15 and 16 talk about, that's actually something that falls more to a higher tier unitary authority than to a district council. It's not necessarily sort of harmful to the council to have that included within the constitution. I think it's just the fact that it says it's one of the councillors' main roles is to have corporate parenting as part of their focus. So the proposal is just to strike that through in terms of that change. I don't know, Chair, whether you want me to do them sort of one at a time in case there's any change, or whether you want me just to go through the other couple of changes in relation to table 1.
Well, for me, just go through them one at a time. Is that, yeah.
I'll pause there in case there's any comments or questions, because the point of this is to get your views to feed into council, so that's probably quite helpful as well.
Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. I know this is something we discussed in the Chair's briefing. Obviously, if you're a county councillor, then you're a corporate parent. If you're a district councillor, you're not. So it does make sense. So in terms of that, it does make the constitution clearer, I think. So just my personal view would be, I'm okay with that. Thanks.
Any more questions?
Can I just say, you can't.
Councillor Berry.
Obviously, we have you have dual council. Some good councillors have dual roles. They are corporate parents at a county level, and you can't excuse yourself from that responsibility when we're here. And I'd like to see it being a bit more obvious for people that it is an appropriate responsibility for even this district council to hold.
Gail, any?
It's perfectly plausible to put something into the constitution to say that obviously where there are double-hatted councillors, that obviously that would apply to them. It's just the fact that it says it's one of the district councillors' main focuses.
Well, honestly, I'm suggesting that we all are. I think it's an important responsibility, and should be included. I think we'd be in a better place if we had both children in mind often when we're making some decisions. Thank you.
Chris?
I understand what Councillor Berry is saying. I think we just do need to be clear around statutory responsibilities as well, though, and that actually a borough council, a district council explicitly does not hold the responsibilities or indeed the powers in relation to children and youth services. So I do entirely understand that, and actually a lot of what Chorley Council does explicitly does recognise that rather than maybe corporate parenting, but certainly that parenting as a village concept in things that the council has done, even just recently around things like Baby Zone. But when we look just purely at the governance aspects of it, I would be cautious about the council having within its constitution a commitment to something that actually statutorily we don't hold, or at least not at the moment.
Thanks, Chris. Are you happy with that, Julie?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Back to you, Gail.
Thank you, Chair. So the next one relates to the procedure before planning committee. So the current constitution, as it says on paragraph 17, says that about 1 week before the planning committee is about to meet, all those with the right to make a request to speak will be informed of their opportunity to do so by council. This is a logistical point. Everybody in the country has a right to make a request to speak, whether you're a local resident, whether you're elsewhere, whether you're a statutory body, you have a right to request it. So it is practically impossible to do what our constitution currently says. So the proposal is that we change it to what we actually do, which is that we notify those that have made a representation by their favoured means of communication, whether that's email or a letter, to let them know about the planning committee. So this is different to neighbour notification of a planning application, which is more guided in terms of statute. This is about how we let people know that that application is coming to planning committee. And I think, as it says in the report, it is impractical to do what it currently says, and actually the change would bring it in line with what we do. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Gail. Any questions on this point? Given that only one person can speak against planning applications anyway, it could cause problems. Right, next item.
Thank you. So I'm going to take the next two and table one together because they are linked. So this is about proposed changes to the waiver process. So within the Constitution, we have our contract procedure rules, and we also have a process where we would waive those contract procedure rules. So I'll just take a moment just to kind of roughly say what our contract procedure rules are. Essentially, any contract that is at the value less than £30,000, we're looking for value for money, and we will invite quotes, ideally, at a minimum of 3, but we may get fewer. If it's over £30,000, we will advertise the opportunity to quote via the chest, which is our procurement portal, and we will seek at least 3 quotations. And if it's over 180,000, which is our key decision, we are looking for tenders, full tenders via the chest. Now, none of what this paper is about is talking about changing any of that. I just thought that was useful context. So there are reasons why you might waive those contract procedure rules, and there are 3 set out in our constitution. One is that the nature of the market has been tested, and justifiably, for that good, that service, that piece of work, cannot provide the number of quotes that our contract procedure rules say. So for some reason, it is such a specialist piece of work or such a specialist product that we'd just forever be looking for somebody that may not exist. So that is a legitimate reason for the waiver. The second point is that it's necessary, the waiver would be necessary in circumstances of extreme or unavoidable urgency that could not have been foreseen. And then the third point relates to Schedule 5 of the Procurement Act, which is in relation to above threshold procurements where there are certain circumstances that a direct award might be necessary. So that's the contract procedure rules, and that's the 3 reasons why we might waive it. What happens in practice is set out in paragraph 2022, in that the waivers are approved by the relevant director, the procurement manager, senior procurement officer, the Director of Finance, the Section 151 officer, the monitoring officer, the Chief Executive, and then the Cabinet member. And all of this, the only change that this proposed changes are seeking to make is to say that because this is an operational, procedural matter in terms of approving that waiver, that in terms of the internal process that we have for approving that waiver, we would exclude the Cabinet member from that approval to waive those contract procedure rules. Now, it's really important to say, and it does go on to say this in paragraph 23, that that is not excluding the Cabinet member from the decision about awarding the contract. They are still involved in doing the project. They're still probably involved in setting up the budget. That often has to come to Cabinet or to Council for approval. It is simply about that documenting that decision to move away from those contract procedure rules. But by the time we get to the contract award process, that would be spelled out within the report, and the reasons and the justification for that would be given at that stage. And it's also important to say, as it says in paragraph 23, that there's routine reporting of those waivers to come to this committee as well. So none of that would change. It's simply that procedural operational point around the internal sign-off that wouldn't go to the cabinet member. And paragraph 25 sets out the reasons why. It just says that it's hoped that it would streamline procurement decision making and remove any unnecessary duplication in the governance process, because there is already quite a lot of people that have to sign off that waiver process. Obviously, it's highly likely that the cabinet member will be involved in discussions. They just wouldn't have a signature in terms of that internal approval process. I hope that's clear, Chair, but happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Gail. Any questions on these 2 points? Councillor Brown?
Thank you. Thanks, Gail, for that. I've got a few comments on this one, actually. One is some of the terminology in the paper, without being overly critical, talks about, because the member will be asked at award stage, contract award stage, to review that constitutes member oversight, and I don't think it does, because I think at that point there would be an imperative usually to get a contract going. If we're at award stage, there's already been resource into that, there's already an expectation, so that feels tick box to me, that I don't think, if a member at that time could say, no, I wholeheartedly don't agree with that process that you followed, what happens then? So I don't quite agree with that. The statement that the current process is disproportionate, given the robust internal controls, as a committee we've already raised the issue of single tender waivers a number of times, and that's because there's a fourth reason for them that isn't in the guidance, and the fourth reason is avoidable issues. So where we've had contracts that have been missed, we need to get something in place ASAP because there's been human error or whatnot, the contract hasn't been reviewed. That is a reason, and that, as a committee, we have already picked up a few of those and asked the question, how do we improve on that? Obviously, we've got the new contract system that's been in place since April as well. So I think that's, whilst I accept that, I don't know how many layers of sign-off you've currently got, 4 or 5 layers, that's cumbersome, I get that. But I do wonder about how we don't just say members aren't involved at that stage. How do we get assurance that what we're signing off is against those 3, and where there are errors that have happened and we've had to do a single tender waiver as a result of it, how do we ensure we've got improvement around that? What I don't know in doing this, because it doesn't give the detail, is what are we talking about? How many times has a member said, I don't agree with that process? So if it's always just signed off, I kind of get it, that it's not doing anything now anyway. I just wonder if there's something about that robustness that we can improve to allow us to support that, because I get it, but I don't think we're there in terms of a panacea of fantasticness at the moment, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Happy to provide a bit more information.
Can I just... All right. Sorry, Gail.
Members are, involved in terms of the process. We do regular briefings with them, so they would be aware of this. There is also the process that for anything over £180,000, it has to be approved in terms of the procurement strategy has to be approved. So the need for a waiver at that point, particularly around urgency, would be picked up, and that in itself would be a cabinet decision. In terms of the number of occasions, from my own directorate, I don't think there's been any occasions where, when we've got to that stage, the exec member has said, no, I'm not happy with that. But I don't have the figures in front of me. Thank you.
Chris?
Just to add, really, I suppose, from just a practical point of view, what we should also be clear on is that this step in the waiver process did not exist until the new constitution was adopted last year at Chorley. Something similar did exist at South Ribble. And in actual fact, actually, if you probably track back through the adoption of the new Chorley constitution, I don't think it was really something that was put in place to deal with either the issue you described, which we agree with, actually. It was put in really without very much conscious thought, I think. And so the point that you pick up, Councillor Brown, about actually it is a relatively burdensome process, deliberately so, actually, because what you actually want to make sure is that if someone's seeking to get a waiver, it's not the fast way of being able to get to where you want to, which is often a contract award. You have to go through all of the council's statutory officers and the procurement team and the legal team before you can get there. It's, in my mind, often easier just to do the thing properly in the first place. In terms of oversight, I would emphasise and flag that this committee receives and will continue to receive on a biannual basis a report of where waivers are in place. I entirely would accept that that's retrospective, but I think actually it's the retrospective nature of it that allows this committee to have an oversight of, are we doing this too much? Are there trends coming out? Are there things we should be concerned by? That actually, in reality, an individual executive member seeing only a small snapshot of waivers, and if we're frank, often with a head of service or director saying, this is okay because of these reasons, is unlikely to spot. So actually, I think it adds an additional burden which probably isn't needed for political oversight, because that political oversight exists around the budget creation, the piece of work itself, the contract award. And it also doesn't really add to the assurance nature of it, because only this committee sees the overall picture. Everybody else just sees that point in time. And because actually, whilst it sometimes I think has felt like we've had lots of waivers, the number of waivers we get across the whole organisation is relatively small, particularly when you then divide that up amongst different portfolio holders and across a year. So one portfolio holder might only see less than 5, I suspect, over a couple of years. Some will obviously be more. Obviously, the exec member for resources or the exec member for assets and major projects will see more come through. So I think my message would be the checks are still there with the statutory officers who are specifically charged with sometimes being awkward. And then we need to maintain the governance element of member oversight with audit and governance committees seeing on a biannual basis. But this didn't exist, and actually waivers have been in place in the old constitution since year dot. It's just that we changed it, I think, without very much conscious thought last year.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Hayden.
Yeah, just like an assurance that the waivers are not raised to cover any sloppiness in how the process has been, underestimated, that the requirements have not been adequately drawn up. So how does that get through there, Gail?
I think, as Chris said, it's through those checks in terms of all those statutory officers, but I would also say that as a director, that's where the conversation is happening around with the head of service and directors about how are we going to procure, and take Chris's point, making this not an easy process. It is actually easier, and I know I can speak from experience in that in terms of conversations I've had with my team, to follow the contract procedure rules there. So it isn't something that we're just doing because there's a sloppiness and a culture of sloppiness. It is something that we are, relatively tight on. And as Chris Smith says, this is the committee that would have that wider oversight of all those waivers.
Thanks, Gail. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think that's fine, as long as we're still aiming for value for money and we're reducing down those single tender waivers so that we can demonstrate that as a public body, I think is the right thing to do. And as long as we see that through here, it would be interesting when we get, I think good when we get the reports here to see it over time, maybe 2 to 3 years, so we can see that trend. But also that we do have that fourth category and we're honest about it. So, from that where we have made mistakes, because then that's how we learn, isn't it? And how we improve from it. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Are you done, or have you got to do
Just a couple more points, Chair, if you'll permit me. So just to highlight to the committee, it's on paragraphs 26 and 27. So we've done quite a thorough page turn, as I mentioned, but we do know there are a couple of other changes that will come through. One is in relation to the standing orders for the leisure companies. They are being worked on. They're being consulted with some external legal teams at the moment, and unfortunately they're not ready at this stage. They will then be brought back to a future meeting to go through this process. And then paragraph 27 references future changes to planning committees coming through legislation through a national scheme delegation. So this is a government initiative to change how planning committees work and the number of applications that go to planning committee. We have seen draft regulations, but because we haven't got the final regulations, it's considered the right approach is to essentially wait until those regulations are laid and finalised, and in which case they will then fall into that category D of necessary changes to comply with the law that can be made by an officer delegation rather than something that necessarily has to come through this committee. But I just wanted to highlight that there's those two further changes that we're aware of, and sort of speaks to Councillor Hayden's point about future legislative changes as well. So thank you, Chair. I have finished now.
Thanks, Gail. Councillor Berry?
Yes, I agree with the sentiment in the further changes paragraph about it's premature really to be including more delegation powers to officers. I just could do with some clarity really. Does even though the new law is going to recommend a lot more is delegated to officers, do councillors still have the right to bring something to committee? And it's concerning me in some ways because in a situation like this, when there's delegation operating, is that we're reliant on information being cascaded down from the cabinet, say the cabinet member, which some councillors who are out in the field might not have that privilege or that opportunity if it's not. And that's very worrying because at the moment with the increasing development projects got in my particular ward is that residents feel really detached from decision making, and to find out that councillors haven't been notified or councillors haven't been able to participate in the decision, you know, really it's really concerning because they're losing trust. And we're talking about, you know, last time we went out to consult on something, I think the response was about 7%. You know, it was really, really low. So I just think we need to be mindful of this when this comes through, that in a strong leadership model, that all councillors are aware of what decisions are being made. Thank you.
Did you want to respond?
Yes. So to be clear, when the government consulted on this, we did respond to say that we didn't agree with this change for exactly some of the reasons that you've made, and also the increasing pressure on officers to be the ones that would be making more decisions about controversial planning applications and the difficult nature that might lead to. Without going into too much of the detail, essentially, as I understand it now, there would be two sort of categories. Category of applications that definitely have to go to committee, and those that don't, unless it is agreed between the chair of planning committee and the chief planning officer that it should go to committee. If there is a disagreement, it would be that the chief planning officer's view is the one that's taken forward. What we are proposing to do, though, is some information for all members, given that you're all ward members, irrespective of whether you're on planning committee or not. So about that, because that would essentially remove your ability to call in. So we will be producing some guidance and probably a training session, I would imagine, over the summer before this comes in towards the end of October, because we are aware of the significance. It is not something we want, it's not something we welcome, but we'll do our best to make sure all members are aware of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Any more questions? Any more queries? Right, this one again I think was for us to make comments on rather than anything else. Item 6, Internal Audit, Annual Report and Opinion 2025-26 of Chorley Leisure. This item is for us again to consider and note the report. Dawn is going to present it, and we are blessed with the Chief Executive who is attending to answer any questions.
Let's go.
No pressure there, is there? Thank you, Chair. I just put a bit of background for this report. So last year in September 25, we reviewed the governance arrangements of the leisure company against the best practice guidance devised by the local partnerships for local authority companies. And this identified that we needed to enhance the reporting of the leisure companies to this committee. So this is the first of a couple of reports that will be presented to yourselves. This is from an internal audit perspective, so it's giving you the assurance from that perspective, but there'll also be a finance report later in the year. So if we just turn to Appendix A, which is the annual report and opinion, and it's set out very much in the same format as our report for the council, so it's giving you that opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the framework of governance, risk management and controls, as required by the standards. So like I say, it's very similar to how we set out the council report. So the leisure company, we provide 4 internal audit reviews a year for the leisure company, and we give them an assurance rating very similar to what we do to the council reports. And you can see under paragraph 7, the 2 reviews that we completed of corporate training and time management, they were awarded a reasonable assurance rating. The other 2 reviews that we did one was the governance review, and as I've mentioned, that identified 22 actions with a range of topics of where we needed to improve those arrangements, and some of those are listed under paragraph 10. We're actually coming to the end of that. We devised an action plan, and we've met with the board of directors, and there's a working group that's working through those actions. We're actually coming to the end of that, and there's a final meeting in September, by which time we expect all of those actions to be implemented. The final review that we did was a follow-up of health and safety. So during 24-25, the company commissioned an external consultant to carry out a comprehensive review of the health and safety arrangements in the leisure company, and that was against industry standards. There obviously was some actions arising from that report, and it was agreed that the work that we would do would follow up on those actions to make sure that they were implemented as intended. There is a small number that are still outstanding, so we are continuing to work with the leisure company and the board of directors to make sure they're implemented as intended, and we'll report back to this committee in September. We follow up agreed audit actions very similar to how we do for the council, and as you can see under paragraph 18, they've got an 80% implementation rate. There are a number of actions which have got revised dates, but again, we're working with the company to make sure that those are implemented. In terms of risk management, again, the company uses our risk management strategy, they comply with that, and they use our risk management system, Grace, that I mentioned a few times. And you can see that they've got a range of registers which I would say are of a good quality. They are recording, they're fully populated, they're recording their risks and controls. There's some minor works needed to make sure that they can be improved, but again, that's something that we're working with the company to make sure they get there, and we have good quality risk registers all round. I've mentioned the governance arrangements, and like I say, we're coming to the end of that review, and hopefully all the actions will be implemented shortly. So based on that, we've given an opinion that the risk management, internal control and governance arrangements within the company are generally adequate. And you can see over the last 12 months, there's definitely been a movement towards having stronger arrangements in place. And that's evident in when we speak to the company as well. As I said, this was identified through that guidance, and it will now be going forward an annual report that's presented to this committee. It'll always go to the board of directors in the first instance and then come back to yourselves. But then I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Dawn? Councillor Hayden.
It's just around the terminology is generally adequate, and it doesn't sound very, like we're really expecting a bit more than that. I think we should be a bit more ambitious.
I don't disagree we should be more ambitious. I don't disagree we should be more ambitious, but that's the terminology that we would use, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the ratings that we would give to an individual review, you know, we do get lots of comments about the ratings and how it's you know, reasonable is a good rating, but it doesn't actually sound particularly good. Yeah, they're just generally adequate, but I would say generally adequate is good, I would say.
If it helps to reassure the committee, where internal audit have to go through a process of assessing themselves and being checked, and I was laughing and smiling at Dawn, because when they do really well, internal audit rate themselves as conforming. And so you know, I often have the conversation with Dawn where the language we use is just sometimes very different. So Dawn's service is an extremely strong and high-performing service, but the highest she'll rate herself is conforming.
Councillor Brown?
Nothing wrong with a bit of prudence. Thank you. I understand the GDPR issue is linked with the Chorley Council overall. I just wondered if we had a bit of a time frame around that. It's appeared in a few meetings now, so when do we think we're going to have that addressed?
So we have received a report which outlines some of the recommendations around that, and we're actually working with the company to address those. And the idea is that we'll bring a report to this committee to obviously outline some of that information.
Do we know when the recommendations will be completed by?
Well, it's going to be later on in the year, and that is the, to be actually fair around that, because the work that is required would actually take a little bit of time to do.
Councillor Clifford?
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I always know we're not here to micromanage anything, but sometimes we just see the odd little bit that looks interesting. So paragraph 10, there was 22 actions were identified for implementation, including, and this is the one that's got me a bit intrigued, the composition of the Board of Directors. Please could you just explain a little bit more what that means? Thanks.
Well, the guidance set out what best practice would look like, and then we obviously compared that to our Board of Directors and how that was aligned or was different, and then a decision was made following that of how that Board of Directors would look and who sat on it.
I can probably give a little bit more. So when the council established its wholly owned leisure company, it made a decision. In other circumstances, you sometimes find that councillors sit on the company board. The decision was made by Chorley Council that wouldn't happen because actually the Articles of Association would limit, to the extent that it could, the ability for the company directors to act, so that it broadly reflected the ability of council directors to act. So it broadly recognised something that reflected council decision making, so that the Board of Directors can make operational decisions, and then when they go outside of that, it would be referred to the shareholder, represented for us by Executive Cabinet, and then for bigger decisions by full council. And so that is broadly how it worked. In terms of best practice, there is potential concerns raised about having your statutory officers sitting on your Board of Directors, because what happens if they have a conflict? I think the view that we've taken is actually that's very limited, because unlike other wholly owned council companies in other organisations, the remit of Chorley Leisure is explicitly limited to Chorley Leisure. It can't go and win contracts elsewhere without explicit permission from the shareholder, which is the council. And I don't think there's any intention to that. If that was, I think we would need to look at changing the board. Also, it had the former Director of Governance as a director, and obviously Chris Moisture had left the organisation last year, and so there was a vacancy. We had the Director of Communities and Leisure and the Director of Finance sitting there, but no third director. And so as part of implementation of this, we've appointed the Head of Economic Development, Michelle Horrocks, as the third director, and that was deliberately done as a senior manager, but someone outside of outside of those statutory officer roles. So yes, we still have section 151 of them there, but it's balanced by having two non-director statutory officers sitting outside of that structure as a check and balance.
Any more questions? Craig, anything from you?
No, I'm fine with that report.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 7, the Health and Safety Annual Report 2025-26. Again, this is for us to consider and provide feedback. Dawn will present this item.
Again, thank you, Chair. So yeah, I'll introduce the item, but we've also got in attendance today, we've got Angela Grime, who's our Health and Safety Team Leader. So she's far more knowledgeable than I am about all things health and safety. So if there's any specific questions, she'll be able to respond to them. So this is an annual report that we present to the committee, and it gives you the assurance about our health and safety arrangements and what processes and what procedures we have in place to ensure that health and safety is taken seriously across the council and all its activities. So the report includes the background to the service, the key activities that we've undertaken. There's an awful lot of detail about the work that we've done over the past year, all the training that's been delivered. There's KPIs and statistics, and we also provide information on our own staff development, how we're developing our own team. We also include the plan for next year, and when we come back next year, we provide that feedback on how we've delivered what's set out in the plan for this year. But happy to take any questions on the report.
Any questions, members of the committee? Councillor Brown?
I've got a couple, I think. One is around the Solo Protect element of the report. And it's great to see that uptake. I just wonder, what I can't glean from it is how many staff we think would benefit or should be using Solo Protect and currently aren't, as to sort of what that gap is. And the second question is around whether we have knowledge of staff that have applied to the DWP for access to work grants who may require reasonable adjustments that we may or may not know about. I know there's long delays with that process, that's all, and some staff may need reasonable adjustments who currently aren't getting them.
Thanks for that. On your question around Solo Protect, we've done a very comprehensive review of the arrangements around Solo Protect. We've used the solution for about 5 years now, and I think we had about 36 users using the lanyard devices. We met with all heads of services, managers, to ask them to really look closely at their loan working arrangements, to identify loan workers. The upshot of that is we've now got 74, I think it is, members of staff that have been identified as requiring the Solo Protect solution as one of many control measures for our loan workers. The use of the app is a new development. Solo Protect have made that available now. So again, the exercise was very thorough in terms of, is a lanyard device or an app the right solution depending on those job roles. So I would say we're in a much better place than we were. We certainly had it. Were we using it effectively? I would have said, in times gone by, possibly not. The report went through to SMT. It was considered that Solo Protect is an item of PPE, so that obviously puts an onus on staff then. So we've done a relaunch. There's lots of support, training opportunities, and an understanding of it's not something that we're imposing on staff. It's that insurance, it's that added protection. So what we're hoping to do, which we will be doing from Q2 for our health and safety reports that go to SLT, is to report on usage, which is something, again, that we haven't previously done. So there will be an onus on managers to set out very clear protocols for usage, and then that we'll be able to monitor that, bring those reports to the senior leadership team, which will make sure that we're getting proper buy-in.
Thank you for that. So do we think there are staff that should be using it that currently aren't? Is there a risk that we need to be aware of as a committee?
I would say that given we have kind of relaunched it, we're in a position now where we're fully aware of who should be using it, the circumstances in which they should be using it. If there are barriers to usage, the data from the monitoring dashboard will help to highlight that. And then, you know, we would expect a kind of a course of action to address any non-usage where it's becoming apparent. I think what we've aimed to do is take away some of the stigma that seem to be linked to it. Are we being tracked? You know, do people not trust that we're making the right judgments when we go to an appointment? It's kind of, I suppose, reintroducing it in a way where it, you know, this is about safety, and it is, you know, something that we'd hope that staff are going to embrace differently now. Yeah, the access to work. It's not something that I would say has come on the health and safety radar so much. We do have a more comprehensive approach to the DSE assessments now, as a result of our internal processes system. So it was quite difficult for us to capture some of the information that we needed to from DSEs. That's much better now, the reporting arrangements, which helps us kind of link into HR. Now, I'm aware, I think, that the access to work is obviously when somebody comes new into an organisation, is that right?
It can be both. We've had this before in the NHS where we found a cohort of staff who had applied for the grant. They were 12 months down the line and needed reasonable adjustments at work, but we weren't aware of it. So we did it a different way and went to DWP and gave our organisation and said, who have you got? So how many of our staff have actually applied for that? It might just be worth considering because it's a way of mopping up if any staff are struggling and internal processes aren't picking that up as a bit of a catch-all.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a joint working element to that with HR, but I would say in terms of the improvement to the completing of assessments and reporting opportunities, and the way that the workflow involves managers as well before it comes through to health and safety, should there be additional needs being addressed through that process. So definite improvements, but I certainly think that will be helpful to consider as well.
It would be, and thank you for that answer. If it's granted as well, there is funding with it through DWP as well. I'm not suggesting that's why there are delays in the process, but it's just one to consider. Thank you.
Sorry, Deirdre?
In view of the murders of the MPs, would it not be maybe safer for councillors to have I've forgotten the name, lanyards?
I think there has been conversation around this in the past, and if I'm right in thinking that the decision was made that it wasn't actually at that time extended to councillors, but if there, you know, if there's further consideration of that, obviously we would support. As I say, the involvement now with Solo Protect and the way we've kind of embedded it as a system, I feel that we will be seeing the benefits from it.
Through you, Chair, if I just may address a point. Part of the reason that these kind of assessments don't take place on members is that members aren't considered to be employees of the council, and therefore there's no legislative duty on the council to do so. Obviously, if the relative groups want to look into that further, then obviously they can do so on their own. But the standard procedure across councils is usually a member isn't an employee, and therefore those services aren't extended to those members. So.
Councillor Hayden?
Thanks, Chair. I was just interested in the Appendix 1, which is page 86, and it was about the near misses. And I noticed that, I know that I'm talking about South Ribble now, the near misses were enormous, really. And when I look back into the report, it's all around the waste management. And I just wondered if we'd learned anything from that to be able to feed into our waste management services to make sure that we stop anything from happening to our own people.
Yeah, I think with the South Ribble Waste Service being an in-house service, we have direct reports from the waste service operatives. They have a really good in-cab system for reporting near-miss reports, so that's done in real time, which we've kind of seen the real benefit of that. Quite a good number of those near-miss reports that come through from waste services are things that could impair the service delivery, so things like overhanging branches which foul the CCTV when drivers are reversing. So there's quite a lot that comes through and is processed and actioned, and hence the higher numbers. I think with our waste service in Chorley being outsourced to FCC, I would certainly expect they would have something similar in place for that.
Craig, do you have something?
Yeah, I just wondered whether it would be helpful if the future reports included comparable figures. So, for instance, on the near misses, you could look at what the figure was for 24-25 and 25-26 and see whether there was a trend. Whereas just looking at the figures for 1 year, you can't really take an awful lot from that. I just don't know if that would be easy to incorporate.
Yeah, absolutely. We have that data to hand, no problem whatsoever. Just one thing I wanted to just pop back on you, the Solar Protect. I've been on a recent webinar with Solar Protect and the Susie Lamplugh Trust, and Solar Protect are offering personalised options on the devices. So if it was something that people were interested in following through on a personal level, they do have those arrangements in place, and if there's any further information you wanted, I could certainly get that for you.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Clifford?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as someone who... I've actually not got it on today, funny enough, because I forgot to charge it. It was flat this morning. But I do use the Solar Protect. We are told to use it at all times because the trouble happens when you least expect it. So sometimes you expect it maybe when you're visiting a house, nothing happens, but actually you're told to wear it all times because it can happen out on the street because somebody recognises you, you've been dealing with something. So I'm a big believer in that. And it's just when you said you're going to monitor usage. So I know from the device, if you're using it properly, you can actually press it and say, I'm going to be in this house for 15 minutes or so. And then as you come out, you say, right, everything's clear. And are you just going to monitor because it does track you every 3 seconds. It's like got a transponder. It's almost like watching a plane. You can see exactly where you've been. Are you just looking at whether people are wearing it, or are you going to look at using it to its full advantage? Because it can do some amazing things to protect people. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. The functionality of Solar Protect does give a range of features, and I think that was one of the things that we've spent time with staff actually explaining that. So, for example, our caretakers working in a community centre till 10 o'clock at night, they've had problems with youths. The ready to talk feature, they're not actually saying I'm in trouble, but they've got somebody there as like a chaperone essentially. When we start to explain that, people are kind of, yeah, that sounds really, really helpful. I think it's the Amber feature, the check-in feature, which essentially is I've arrived at this appointment, this is my address, which is used only in the event of an activation. The Alarm Monitoring Centre will listen to that last recorded message. They'll align that with the GPS, and if they're having to get the emergency services, they've got an absolute pinpoint. What we're looking to do is where we're expecting staff to use the check-in function, the dashboard will show that function has been used, over the course of the last week 10 times. What we're asking is that staff will also populate their Outlook calendars, and for a manager to get the assurance that it's being used, 10 appointments, 10 check-ins, it's being used. So I think it's that, it's the simplicity as well that we're trying to encourage staff to see. I think there's 1 or 2 issues with charging and things like that, and suddenly the ripple effect has created a degree of negativity around the usage. But we're working towards addressing that, and I do think you know, where we've had one or two, not so much real time, you know, serious incidents, but where people are reporting back to say, I did use it. We get the report from Solar Protect to say what that contact was like. It will, I feel, in 12 months' time, I hope we'll be seeing a real good response to it, and hopefully no real incidents.
Thanks, Andra. Can I just check, have you still got your hand up, Craig, or is it my eyesight?
No, it's probably I've not lowered it. I'll lower it now.
Thanks, Angela. Any more questions? No? Right, we'll move on to the next item. Now, any officers who've sort of finished their little bit, if they don't want to stay, please feel free to go. I find it so interesting, wow. We'll move on to item 8, which is the Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report. This item is for decision. We're asked to consider and endorse the report's presentation to the Council. And over to Dawn again.
Again, thank you, Chair. So this is a requirement of the CITFA's audit guidance, so practical guidance for local authorities and police from 2022 in the position statement. It contains a requirement for the Audit and Governance Committee to produce an annual report and then for that to be presented to Council. So the report is attached to Appendix A, and it covers, like you said, the terms of reference, how you're meeting those terms of reference, all the reports that have been presented to you over the course of the year, the composition of the committee, all the training that's been carried out over the course of the year. You'll recall that we've agreed a full training plan at the last meeting. It also sets out the work programme for next year. We looked as well at the effectiveness. You'll recall that in January this year, we did a full assessment of how the committee operates against the guidance from CITFA, and that didn't identify any further actions. So we are meeting the requirements in full, and then this is the final section of it, really, to present that report to Council in September, if you're happy with it.
Thanks, Dawn. Any questions for Dawn? Oh, are we happy with this one then? Right. Can I move to a vote on approving the annual report? Have a proposer, please. Councillor Clifford, seconder. Anybody you want? All those in favour? Thank you. Item 9, the Internal Audit Charter and Strategy Update. Again, this item is for decision. We're asked to consider and approve the updated strategy and charter, and Jackie's going to present this one.
Hello. Yes, I brought with me the audit charter and the strategy update. So members may remember GAIAS came into force April last year. So that's the Global Internal Audit Standards in the public sector. And at that point in time, we brought you our new revised, updated charter to make sure we were complying with those standards. We also brought the strategy, which was a new document for ourselves. So 12 months on, we've reviewed that to make sure that it still meets our requirements and the requirements of the standards. There's very little changes in the charter. I think we've just maybe changed some reporting lines and the name of the committee. So there's no difference there, really. The strategy, we just sets out our objectives as a service, what direction we want to go in, and we set out some actions for ourselves, some areas that we wanted to improve on or be more robust about, really, to make sure that we're definitely meeting those new standards that were brought in. 3 actions were agreed, and we've completed 2 out of the 3 actions. One of the actions was around training, and because GAIAS comes with a whole new raft of requirements. I've attached in one of the appendices for you our competency assessment framework, which sets out all the skills, experience, knowledge that's expected of a competent internal auditor. We've used that to assess our team, just to make sure that we know where the gaps are, and we've got a plan in place for internal training or external training as needed. The last action relates to mapping of our assurance providers. So the Internal Audit Service provides you with assurance about how our services are operating. We're mapping out other organisations that also provide the council with assurance about the services. So maybe people that give us external benchmarking, peer reviews, that sort of thing. We've started planning for that. We're just trying to get our methodology in place about the level of information that we want that document to capture. So we're expected to complete that in the coming months. That's my report. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take any questions on it for you.
Thanks, Jackie. Any questions for Jackie? Oh, we've got off lightly. Now, this item is for a vote. Can I move on to vote on approving the strategy and charter of a proposer? Councillor Clifford, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Hayden, thanks. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 10 is the Treasury Management Outturn Report 2025 to 2026. This item is again for us to consider and note, and Oliver's going to present this one. Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the Treasury Management Outturn Report for the financial year 25-26, which is one of 3 Treasury reports that are required throughout the year, along with the Treasury Strategy, which goes to Council as part of the budget papers, and the mid-year review, which comes to this committee in November. This report presents a position of the Council as at the 31st of March 2026 in terms of its investments and borrowing. The report first addresses capital expenditure and borrowing from paragraph 11. Capital expenditure is monitored and reported on quarterly, and in this report you'll see the details of the capital outturn in Table 1. Capital expenditure can be financed either internally through capital and revenue resources or externally, which gives rise to a need to borrow. The Council retained its under-borrowed position throughout the year, which is to say that actual external debt is below the capital financing requirement, and the Council has used its own internal resources to fund capital expenditure. The Council has remained within its operational boundary and authorised limit for borrowing, which was set by Council in the capital strategy in February 2025. Moving on to investments from paragraph 33, when considering investments, we must take into account security, liquidity and yield in that order. The Council holds cash in both fixed-term deposits, where the money is tied up for a specified amount of time, and call accounts or money market funds, where the cash is available immediately. Across the 25-26 financial year, the Council saw a return of about £750,000 on its investments, with an average yield of 3.29%. So to summarise, the Council remained within its prudential indicators and adhered to its approved counterparty limits and retained an under-borrowed position. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Oliver. Any questions for Oliver? We're cooking on gas now, aren't we? You too have escaped lightly. Again, this item was simply for us to note, so no further questions. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Member Standards Update 2025-26. And Tasmin is going to present this one, and she's got something to say.
Thank you, Chair. So the report before you members provides an annual analysis of complaints received under the Members' Code of Conduct during the year 25-26 and confirms how those complaints were actually managed and the outcomes. So members will see at the table at paragraph 10, which outlines the complaints received and the outcomes. You'll note that there are a total of 14 Code of Conduct complaints received during that year. 4 complaints were made by councillors against other councillors, and 10 complaints were made by members of the public against councillors. None of the councillor and councillor complaints met the initial assessment threshold, and therefore no further action was taken. Of the public complaints, 4 did not meet the initial assessment criteria. 1 complaint was discontinued. 2 complaints were resolved through informal resolution as allowed by the Code of Conduct, and 3 complaints remain at the assessment stage. So that's a little bit of an overview for you, and you obviously within the tables it outlines those complaints that were against borough councillors and those that were against parish councillors. Importantly, no complaints resulted in formal action or investigation outcomes against councillors. So while the number of complaints has increased from last year, the increase relates primarily in respect of complaints against parish councillors, and the absence of any cases progressing to formal action provides a reassurance that standards amongst Chorley Borough councillors continues to be maintained and the Code of Conduct framework is operating effectively. Members are asked to note the report, and I'm happy to take questions.
Oh, thanks, Taz. Any questions for Tasman? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, thanks for that, Taz. I'm just interested in the parish councillor increase and whether, I know we can't go into details, but whether that's a specific parish council or is this a general theme that we're looking across the whole of the parishes?
So there have been obviously complaints, and there have been in respect of a number of councillors across a number of parishes.
Councillor Hayden?
I know we can't go into details, Taz, but are they based on the behaviour of the public? Are they generally more aggressive towards councillors, or can you give us any? I think it's outlined in the actual report. A number of those complaints were actually considered to be quite trivial. So there may be some sort of tit-for-tat political sort of rivalry around that, or there may be some aspects which a member may think it's disrespect, but actually, if you actually consider the code, it doesn't actually come under it. So it's trivial in nature. Yeah.
Councillor Berry?
Yeah, I just think it'd be reasonable to be in touch with parish councils to see if they would like to take up some joint training around standards. Often it's, you know, people just don't know how to behave, and actually the standards system doesn't really sort of remedy anything, does it? You know, you just want an apology at least. I've had people complain about me, you know, not being offensive to me in a situation involving the parish council, and it's just really sad to see, really. And I just wondered, when you've got all these complaints coming in, how do we compare with other areas that are similar, and is there a particular type of behaviour that we need to be aware of or avoid? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's obviously important that all councillors are aware of the Code of Conduct and obviously the behaviours around that and all principles. We did provide training to, it was offered to all parish councillors last year, and there was a little bit of an uptake around that, but I mean, we can look into that again and we can provide further training this year. Yeah.
Thanks, Taz. Any more questions for Taz? Any more points you want to bring up? No? Okay, we shall move on to, Taz again, item 12, Regulation of the SP Powers Act update.
I can obviously provide you an update. I mean, there have been no applications in respect of RIPA, which is actually good news. But yes, we have actually had notification from the regulator that they'd like to do a bit of a desktop compliance overview. So we'll be providing some feedback in respect of that in the next committee meeting.
Oh, you'll have more to say then. Smashing. Any questions for Taz? No? Okay. Item 13 is the work programme 2026-2027, 165 to 166 on your papers. We're asked to note it and provide any feedback. Hang on, I think I'm on my last page here. Now, my script doesn't tell me who's doing this. So, any questions, any points of interest anybody has? No? Lovely. In that case, any urgent business previously agreed with the chair? There is none. So that concludes the meeting, and thank you all for attending. And thank you to the officers. Thank you.
Chair.